and I'm the Executive Director of the Idea Center. We're kind of the hub of innovation and entrepreneurship for Miami Dade College, and we have a lot of programs also for the community. We have an amazing new degree in business entrepreneurship where the idea is to connect you with the tech ecosystem in South Florida and in the US. We're launching that officially in January. We also have a number of programs to teach you 21st century skills. All of you know about CS50. We're launching tonight our coding brand called Code Pro, and Sari Coltham will be talking about it. We also have a digital marketing program called Market Hack. Tomorrow, actually, we have the chairman of MDC, Cesar Conde, talking to the students, and you're welcome to come. And it's really a crazy week. We have on Thursday Travis Kalanick, the CEO of Uber. So a lot going on at the Idea Center this week. So let me introduce you, Eliana. She's here. Eliana Murillo is the head of Multicultural Marketing at Google. She has developed programs that support diversity in entrepreneurship, education, and civic engagement with the use of technology. She's a graduate of Harvard University, and she serves on the junior board of World Fund in New York City. She was included in the 20 Under 40 Corporate Rising Stars by Poder 360, Most Inspiring Latinas in Tech by Brit & Co., and one of the top 20 most prolific Latinos to follow on Twitter by Vista Hispana. And moderating tonight is my friend Ben Worth. He's the Director of Venture Investments of Knight Foundation. Let me tell you something that only Yale University and Miami Dade College has an agreement with Harvard University in the way that now CS50 is going to be taught. So thank you, Sari, for all your efforts on that. Very good. Eliana, we're very grateful that you're here with us. Teach us about Google. Ben, the floor is yours. Just have fun, okay?
Okay, awesome. Thanks, man. Thanks, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. And Leandro, you're doing amazing things. It's really just a privilege to be able to support the Idea Center. Eliana and I met about 30 minutes ago. So but you know what I did, because I was smart, I Googled her before she got here. And so I came up with a list of questions. Obviously, you know, you have an amazing bio, and really thanks so much for coming and doing this. I looked up your blog, one of the things that came up when I Googled you, and it talks a bit about what it means to be a chingona, and how it's a term that you draw inspiration from. And so I just wanted to ask you to talk more about that, and how that, how you've taken kind of ownership of that, and how that's shaped your journey.
Okay, sure. Can you all hear me? Yes. Well, before I answer the question, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for showing up, for coming and joining me. It's such a pleasure to be in the Miami community. As I answered the question, I'll share a little bit about my backstory. I'm from Oxnard, California, north of LA, and also from a very diverse, very Latino community. And so Miami has become somewhat of a second home because it reminds me of where I'm from. I feel like everyone I meet feels like a distant cousin because there's a lot of shared experience here. And to answer the question, how many of you have heard of the word chingona in a positive sense, or heard of it at all? So this is the distinction between where I'm from and Miami. So where I'm from, the word chingona means kind of like a badass Latina, like someone who's like really hardworking. They have to be very motivated, and it's kind of an aspirational term. And my family's from Mexico originally. I was born and raised in California, but very connected to Mexico still. And so my family always uses it as a positive word. When you say someone's a chingon, I don't know if you ever heard of George Lopez, the comedian, he always says like muy chingon, like you're a boss. But if you called someone a chingona, it was like you complain and you're kind of bossy, and it wasn't a positive thing. And like I said, in my house, it always meant, it was like échale ganas, put a lot of effort into it. Tienes que ser chingona. So I knew that in my household that was a positive, and I realized that not everyone either knew of it or embraced it that way, and I thought, let's redefine the term. So I launched a blog around what it means to be a chingona, but more importantly, the words and images that I hope can keep everyone motivated and inspired, because being a chingona can be hard, because anyone, and you're all honorary or I don't want to overuse the word, but if that resonates with you as someone who has to work really hard and echarle ganas, things don't always come easy. So you need to be inspired all the time and remember what centers you and it motivates and drives you to keep going. Anyone, does that resonate with anybody? Yes? Okay, a couple of us. So I launched this blog, chingona.soy. .soy is a domain we launched. I am, right? So soy chingona, chingona.soy. And it's funny you found that when you Googled me. It must be doing well in SEO. Because, like I said, I thought that there aren't very many of us. I think you all are part of this community. Those of us who want to aspire to further yourself, maybe for yourself, for your family, for your community. And so I wrote my own definition of what it means to be chingona, and I described it as, you can read it if you'd like. There's a long, kind of a poem about it. But it's a word that I wanted to redefine so people can hopefully look to it for strength the way I did growing up. And anyway, so that's my long-winded answer for what chingona
that was
means
great.
to me.
And so is that something that you kind of took ownership of before you got to Google, or sort of after you got there?
So I published this blog and this piece just a year ago, but grew up with the term for sure. And my cousins and I, the primas, the girl cousins, we would always say, like, we have to be chingonas. Like, many of us are, let's see, my mom went to college, so I'm second generation, but I have cousins who are first generation. And we all kind of feel like for our family, we're in the first generation overall, first stage of what it means for Latinos in this country to further themselves through education. So we just had to remind ourselves that we had to be chingonas and that you're not alone. There's others that may not even look like you, but we're all in this together. And so it definitely was a part of my upbringing, that spirit, that theme, because I came from Oxnard, which is, the city is about 64% Latino, but my high school is 93% Mexican-American, Mexican in general. So that said, my honors classes didn't have very many Latinos in them. So I was one of the few. Most of my friends, despite my school being so diverse, my friends were mostly like Filipinos and of other different backgrounds. And I never thought I'd go to school like Harvard. You know, I had studied and worked hard, but no one from Oxnard goes to Harvard, or went. That's what I thought, right? At the time, my mom was the one who put, my mom being President Chingona, she said, you have to apply. And I was like, Mom, why would I do that? No one from Oxnard goes to Harvard. And she said, you never know unless you try. And so I did, despite all the nagging. I literally submitted my application December 24th, just before we flew to Mexico to see my family. I submitted it and thought, don't expect anything, you never know. And I ended up getting in and didn't want to go, but someone said, you don't say no to Harvard, and I said, fine, so I went. I didn't want to leave home, but having gone, and I had gone to public school my whole life, so getting to a place like Harvard, which is a very different environment for me, I had been at a school where I did well, but then got to a place where everyone felt smarter than me. And have you guys heard of the phrase imposter syndrome? Means like you think you're the one that snuck in, that shouldn't be here, don't know why you're there, think they're gonna catch you, you're a mistake. That's how I felt when I first started there, absolutely. And so having to channel my inner chingona and find strength in that, and the community in that, was important for me in going to Harvard, eventually getting to Google. So it's been a theme from that.
Cool. And does Google feel like a place where that kind of attitude is welcome?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Google definitely hires people who want to change the world, which means that there's something inside of you, some kind of sense of purpose to do more, to be part of something bigger than yourself. I think that you find that in any Googler I've met, I've seen that spark. And so, I mean, particular to Chingonas, specifically Latinas at Google, I feel like the ones I've met have that in them too, for sure.
Cool. And I mean, in these days, it's almost trite to say that you want to change the world, right? I hate to say
Right.
that, but like everybody feels,
Right.
sort of empowered to do that, which makes you wonder where we're going, I guess, if everybody's trying to change things. But
50 versions of the world.
But yeah, I mean, why is it that why does Google feel like the kind of place that you can have the impact that you want in the world?
I think a number of reasons. I'd bring it down to culture, products, and the breadth of what we can do. So I think in terms of culture, that's what first attracted to me, the company. I never thought I'd be in tech. I thought marketing and advertising, and that's what I do now, but I didn't think of it within the tech world. And so what attracted me initially was the culture. I studied sociology of economics. I'm really interested in group dynamics, how do groups behave in ways that impact the economy, and even just in institutions. And so when I got there, I thought it's really remarkable how they've scaled the startup culture. The first group of a few engineers who thought they could change the world, and that's now thousands of Googlers in 90 offices in 60 countries, all feeling like they can still have an impact in some way. I thought that was really interesting. So that's been a great thing to be a part of and have that spirit still driving a lot of the work. The products themselves, I was mentioning earlier, I think one of the unique things is, who's here used Google search before? I hope you've all in some way used the product, or YouTube. And there's a number of products that can all be relevant to students, small business owners, tech entrepreneurs, teachers. The products can reach a lot of different types of people. And so part of my job is I have to know a little bit, as much as I can, about as many products as possible, because I get grilled constantly. I'll go to a conference and they'll say, I need to fix my AdWords. I need to learn how to optimize my YouTube channel. And they think that you as a Googler know everything. So I have to know as much as I can about a lot of products. But it motivates me to want to learn more, because I realize that all of you could be touched by a Google product in a different way. And so I think that's an interesting kind of portfolio of tools to have at your disposal. I always knew that I wanted to be at a company that could do a lot for people and not feel limited, like I only make pens, right? I'm sure there's a pen maker who feels very proud that they can write ideas down with pens, but that's all you can do, right? And I like that I can talk about AdWords or YouTube or a number of things, and that's a different way of changing each person's world. And then the last thing I think is just in terms of scale. We have billions of users searching things every day, so it's a pretty cool place to be.
Be creative. Be a hero. Be the solution. Be connected. Be innovative. Be global. Be successful. Be you. Be MDC. Be Miami Dade College.
So, I mean, it's this it's a very powerful but also massive kind of company. And I've been to Google campus, I guess maybe 2 years ago or so, and I saw kind of the big slide, and there are airplanes up, and there's like people ride scooters around, and it's just sort of a, I don't know.
You're describing the internship movie.
Right. Well, yeah, it wasn't. This was before the movie came out, but it felt a bit like that. Does that affect productivity at all? I mean, the fact that you can, there's sort of all these ways to have fun. You have, restaurants on campus. I mean,
I mean, I'm joking about the internship, but how many of you have seen the movie The Internship? If you haven't, it's about it's basically just about Google and what it's like to work there. So some people will see that and wonder if it's true or not, because it looks so kind of even silly almost, so many games and free food and everything. And that's all true. It does exist for sure. And sometimes it feels like it's like a fun house for adults. But I think there's a balance, though. The fun is meant to keep people inspired, creative. Kids are fearless and come up with crazy ideas all the time because they're playing all the time. They're always inspired. They're not locked, depressed at their desks or whatever kids are doing these days. So I think the play helps inspire creativity, but on the point of productivity, I think that typical Googlers, for the most part, are people who can kind of self-regulate, self-moderate. There's very little hand-holding. I've never heard of a Googler say, my manager is watching how many hours I sit at my desk and how much time I spent on X, Y, Z. That's not really the part of the culture. People are hired to do their job and to feel inspired by the bikes that are around campus to ride between buildings and the free food, things like that. All those things I think are meant to keep you feeling more creative and inspired. And I'll see engineers take a break and go play ping pong or Dance Revolution, and they get really into it actually. They get really hardcore. But I think that if anything, that helps them kind of break away. There's a lot of studies that show that, right? If you break away from your work, it helps you actually produce more, to focus more deliberately instead of feeling like you're dragging on forever. So I think it's a fun mix.
Cool. And so take us back to your first day, right, at Google. You sort of arrive, it looks like the internship, right? Like you get there are a bunch of, I don't know, there's a bunch of stuff that's happening. Like what were your impressions?
Yeah, I'll tie back to a few things I said, because it was like a mix of a lot of emotions and feelings. One was, in the movie The Internship, there's a scene where the Vince Vaughn character freaks out at this cafe, and he's like, so the bagel's free and the banana's free, and I can have everything. He wants all of it, and they're like, yeah, it's Google, you can have it all. So that was one of the first things. I love food. I wanted to go to culinary school. I love food. So that was a huge shock for me. This is the first day. They're not really, you're in training. They're welcoming you to Google, and they keep offering us snacks and more snacks. Like, it doesn't stop. They just keep feeding us. So that was really cool and kind of unusual for me. The other was to just take it in. I thought, like, I'm around some of the smartest people in the world, and some of them are on scooters, some of them are coding, some of them are brainstorming right next to me. So that was just taking the people around me in. That was a lot. And then a little bit of imposter syndrome, to be honest, of thinking, like, I hope I'm not the mistake that snuck in. I want to figure out a way to have an impact very quickly, and make that impact that everyone's looking to have. Yeah.
Can you talk more about kind of there's the 20% time, which a lot of people talk about, right? Which my understanding, and I'd love to know if this is correct, is sort of you get to allocate 20% of your time to a project that's not necessarily directly related to your work deliverables, and that is another way to sort of encourage creativity, and there have been all kinds of like Google News and other things that have been developed as part of that 20% time. Is that so? How have you experienced that? And,
I'm like the biggest fan of 20% time. It's amazing. I encourage you all to find some 20% in your life. Like you said, like Gmail was someone's 20%. So 20% time, as he described, it's kind of an understanding that it's okay for you to spend 20% of your time on something outside of your core role. In the end, it's like 120. You do your full job and then you do something extra. But a manager isn't going to say, you can't do this extra thing. If you have time for something, you should be putting that back into your core role. That's very rare, because people know that if you have some other idea, you might as well pursue it, because it could result in Gmail or Google News or your job. My job is actually the result of my 20% project. I started it when I was an intern, thinking about Latinos as a consumer group, to learn about them and how we could help advertisers reach them. When I came back full time, developed that into an internal, what I call a strategy consulting group, to advise across different business units how to think about Latinos. And that evolved into a number of ways. So I've had 4 roles at Google. I've been there for 5 years. So of the 4 roles, I created 3 of them from scratch for my 20% time, which over time, like I said, evolved. So initially it was starting this internal strategy effort to educate teams about Latinos. It evolved also into Latin America. I was very interested in LATAM, and so I started working with the Latin American team to develop curriculum to educate universities about how to make sure the curriculum teaches what we need to hire for, which I think is just important in terms of building a pipeline. LATAM is high growth, so that was cool. Evolved into working on the diversity markets team, which is a team on the diversity side of people operations dedicated to building partnerships in the communities, a number of communities across the US, where we need relationships to make sure that organizations like chambers of commerce and others can help us evangelize for the products that we know can help people on the ground. And along the way, all these 20% projects that evolved into jobs, it was like 2 jobs for me, right? It was like, I have my real job, I have to do my 20% that I love, and hopefully commit enough time to it to prove to a manager, to say, I've delivered this for you in 20%, right? Like, I'd always try to align with the core team. And I had to say, if you open up headcount, if I did this in 20%, imagine what I could do with 100% of my time. And the way to do that, I could never say I did that alone. It absolutely was not my own effort by myself. I started things, I would see things, but I would find people who were incredibly gifted and talented and had skill sets that were amazing, but happened to be Latino. So we just kind of were friends, but first and foremost, they were just very brilliant. And I would ask them, what are you personally passionate about? What would you be doing if you weren't at Google? And some of them would say, I would be helping Latino startup entrepreneurs. That's my friend Danny Navarro. I said, okay, so that's what we're gonna do. So as part of HOLA, which I named this effort, Hispanic Opportunities in Leadership and Advocacy, I said, okay, let's start an entrepreneurship branch. So I was being asked about what we're doing around entrepreneurship. Well, we developed a whole Hispanic outreach effort for Hispanic entrepreneurs. And Danny, my friend, started helping me with his 20% time. So my 20% seeded other people's 20%, and we all together worked cohesively. And he started working with the Google for Entrepreneurs team. We'd collaborate together to bring diverse partners to the table. He started managing the whole team's diversity portfolio, and that's now his full-time job, and mine in marketing as well resulted from many of these efforts across entrepreneurship, small business, education. So we've been seeding things along the way. So if you haven't heard of any of these things, it's because we still feel like we're just getting started, because we're never going to be done. But we need people like you all who are learning about these things to spread the word, to help us make sure people know about the things that we're doing, because we're all like that grain of sand, right? That's trying to be our part of the bigger picture. And so I think the powerful thing about 20% time is that we could find people who had a passion for doing something completely outside of their core role and dedicate enough effort to it to, it doesn't always evolve into a full-time job per se. I got lucky and I found people who not only worked with me together, but also kind of sponsored and advocated for this work. But I think at the end of the day, it's what keeps people connected to Google's mission about changing the world. And that's when it's easy to say everyone wants to, but you might not be hired to change the world, like your title might not be like change agent, but you can get hired to do sales, engineering, whatever, and still find some way to have an impact outside of your core role. So like I said, if you all can find a 20% in life, I think it's so amazing because I think what helps fuel the motivation to keep going in your day job. And people always set up time with me to say, I want to create my own job. How did you do it? I said, well, I started with a 20%. And they asked me, where's the list? Like, there's no list of 20% projects. You have to go find one. Find a problem you want to solve. Find a team you want to work with. And that's part of being kind of entrepreneurial. I'd like to call myself an intrapreneur because my team is like a startup within Google. So we've had to bootstrap. We've had to prove our worth to investors being sponsors within the company. But I think that's part of it is not being afraid to, as we say, ask questions and build answers.
Cool. So, all right, so I'm sitting in the audience, I'm sold, I want to I want to sign up, dude, I feel like I'm ready. What are the tips you can give for people here who are looking, down the road or tomorrow to go, look for a job at Google?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a few things. I want to make it tactical so you know what to do. There's a few websites that we always promote. I'm going to start with that and I'll explain why. There's a site like google.com/students. If you're a student currently, write it down. You can find all information about internships, full-time opportunities, and then google.com/jobs. Very simple domains. That's where you can find all the information about applying to jobs. So people sometimes say, I have no idea where to start. Go check out the sites, lots of info there. In terms of advice I can give you though, as you're looking at those websites, thinking about applying, I hinted at a few of these things, but I think one big factor that we always talk about is we like to hire people, and I don't hire personally, unfortunately, but the company likes to hire people who are comfortable navigating ambiguity. You really have to be okay with not being handheld. I know friends, and to their credit, they're wonderfully talented, but they need someone to write them the to-do list. Like, what do you need from me? What are the expectations so that I can deliver well? That rarely happens at Google. It's very rare that anyone ever says, here's exactly what you're going to work on, and here's exactly the output we want. They might say, we have a problem, figure out how to address it, and then you tell us what success looks like. So if you're comfortable with that, yes, consider a place like Google. Someone who's somewhat entrepreneurial, right? Like I said, being able to not be afraid to launch something, to maybe fail, but try. We say launch and iterate. Think about that, and when you're writing your resume, to make it specific in terms of advice, think about how you can describe when you've been an entrepreneur. That doesn't mean it has to be a startup. Maybe you started a student group, or you led one even. Entrepreneurship comes in different shapes and sizes and flavors. Leadership in general, right? Like demonstrate when you've been a leader, when you've launched something, when you weren't afraid to take a risk, when you inspired a group of people to come together. That could have been something you did at your church or your, like I said, student group. It can take so many different forms. What else to think about? I'm trying to think of the best advice I can give you.
There's not like a secret back door that you can knock.
I know.
No.
There's this code. Everyone tweet it. I also think it's really important. Every company will say this, but not all of them really mean it, I don't think, because I've visited a lot of companies. There was a time when I didn't work at Google and had internships at other places, or just visited them and saw that they said this, but I didn't really see it like in front of me, was to actually really be yourself and tell your story. Because there's a lot of pressure sometimes to look like everyone else in terms of these are the scores you need, or this is the experience you need. But I really do believe that Google hires people with unique stories, because that diversity of experience is what shapes our products and strategies and things like that. So as much as you can convey in your resume, if you're thinking of applying tomorrow, about who you really are, what you really care about, put that out there. There's people who take my shuttle to work who have like blue hair and like all kinds of quirky things, right? Like if you're unique and different, really highlight that. And that's what I mean by not all companies say that, because you can say be yourself, but then you still have to work on the uniform to work. You can wear whatever you want to Google. You can, be yourself. And you seem very excited about this. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. Because that's part of the culture of really embracing that uniqueness. And Anything else I can think of? I'll come back to it if I think of any.
Yeah, I mean, so I read this, Laszlo Bock, who's I don't know if is he still head of HR? Yeah, okay, so still former and current head of HR at Google, wrote a book which was actually really interesting around kind of how his thinking and I guess the company's thinking evolved around hiring, because initially a lot of the people came from Stanford and Harvard and sort of elite Ivy schools, and then and so, they thought, oh, that's a good way to hire is,
Right.
check for people who graduated from these schools. And it turns out that is not actually a really good indicator of success at Google, and in terms of, people who go on and do great things. And so they have sort of rethought, how that works. And the phrase that came to mind was basically they try to solve for people who have achieved a lot given where they started from, as opposed to where they ended up. And so I don't know exactly how they're implementing that, but
I have a ton of great friends, colleagues, fellow Googlers who have really broad backgrounds, who did not go to the same short list of 5 schools. It is true, it's competitive, that's a fact, but it doesn't mean you have to go to the top school to be competitive. There's a number of things that can go without saying. You have to do well academically, show that you're smart somehow. Sometimes that's grades, sometimes it's something you built, if you're an engineer in particular. But yeah, I think it's a really unique approach to hiring, because they found that if you're only hiring from the same 5 schools, it's all you're ever going to get, right? People who are kind of trained or brought up the same way might think similarly, and you need a lot of diverse perspective to produce products that solve for the entire world's users. So that's always, the ultimate challenge is make sure our task force looks like the users we're trying to reflect. So I don't know if this kind of ties back to advice or not, but I think that at the end of the day, I think it's just about working really, really hard to prove that you have some value to add, and know that you shouldn't be held back by thinking the perception that you didn't go to the XYZ school that you needed to go to. But I think instead hold yourself to a different bar, which is, as you kind of referenced from the book, it's show how much you've accomplished from where you started, and be competitive in that way.
So just to throw some numbers, having said all that, 2 million people apply for a few thousand positions at Google every year, so the odds are, sort of not in your favor necessarily. And the outcomes of that historically have been, from a diversity standpoint, disappointing. I think it's, disappointing for the company, disappointing for folks like me and Knight Foundation in general, who would love to see, the tech community reflect the country at large, right?
Yeah.
And so, to your credit, Google started publishing numbers, I guess last year, and the numbers that I pulled, so last year, 20% of tech employees were female, only 5% of the workforce, and 3% of tech staff are Black or Hispanic, right? And so, you didn't mention this as part of your first day at Google, but I imagine you walk in and it's a bunch of white dudes, right? Who
are remixed to that.
Yeah.
The first day when I joined, it was not diverse in terms of the diversity I knew at home. It was a different kind of diverse. It was a lot of Asian, South Asian, white, like people who historically have history in being engineers. And to the point about the numbers being so low and what it looked like otherwise, Latinos and African Americans make up 5% in total. That's very low. When we see each other, we kind of give each other the nod, like we're the unicorns. But I think that what's promising, though, is that there are a lot of efforts, like what the Knight Foundation and others are doing, and what Google's doing in many ways, to change that. And I think that our industry is probably now accelerating faster toward change than many others, because I talk to leaders, Latino leaders at other companies, like the CEO of Consumer Reports is Latina. And we talked about how we go to conferences, not just tech, just in general conferences, and there's hardly any women, hardly any Latinas. And so in general, I think there's a national crisis around talent at corporations, period. Google was the first to out our own numbers, to strike a conversation, and that led to many other companies bringing it up. And it wasn't just to say something and not do anything about it. It was because part of it is Google changes its own practices to hire. So what you just described of Laszlo, our SVP of People Operations, he has said it's not about where you went to school, it's about what you've accomplished, what you've achieved, and that's a different metric. We're changing that. And Google's existed for about 17 years. So we have a much shorter history than a lot of industries, but we're trying to get ahead of it. And so when I mentioned that the diversity didn't look like my kind of diversity, it looked like diversity of there's other communities that I hadn't grown up around, a lot of, Chinese, South Asian, Southeast Asian. Most other immigrant communities came to the US through engineering and through professional tracks. A lot of my friends who are Indian, their parents actually were doctors and engineers when they came. For Latinos, it's not always the case, and African Americans. A lot of our families don't have history in this. So as much as people look to Google and the tech is like, you guys need to fix this and do something about it, it's on all of us, really, right? Every single person in this room could be a part of the change, because if you're not into tech, your neighbor or your niece or your son could be. And so I think what I'm excited about is that this is sparking a broader conversation about how there is an impetus and a need for all of us to do something in order for that diversity number to change. Because I see on the inside they're trying to change the way they hire. I also was sharing earlier that it's on us to change perception about what it means to work in corporate America and technology. Because I mentor so many kids who are amazingly talented African American and Latino students who came from Miami or Atlanta or Harlem or the Bronx. And they come up to Google for a summer, they actually got in, the crazy stats of how hard it is to get in, they made it, and then they all went home because they didn't want to be away from family. And I know how hard that is. I don't live near my family and it's tough. My teammate Susana's here, she's from Miami, and she can attest to this too. Susana's here in the corner. It is hard to be away from family, to be away from the communities we know, but we need to change people's perception about why it matters, why it's worth leaving home, even if it's for a year or two to get your feet through the door. But I think there's a lot to be said for changing perception. And all of you are here because you're connected to an educational institution, but my mom's a high school teacher, and she still has students who say that their families need them to work instead of going to a community college or a four-year school because they have immediate needs at home. And I don't know how many of you can relate to that. I have cousins who still are dealing with that. So until our communities realize that they need to pursue education as a long-term investment of their time, because yes, the realities of family dynamics and needs are real. That may not apply to everyone, but I'm sharing from what my mom's students go through every day. And if we are able to convince people that education has a different route, to get families to realize that yes, computer science is very hard. I have friends who got through it who say they wanted to quit like every month because it was so challenging, but at the end they were so glad they did it. And their families say, if it's that hard, why are you doing it? Like concerned moms, like you're stressing out, why? But we need to get moms saying, it's hard, but be chingona, be that invested in it. It's hard, but it's worth it. So if we step up, and companies like Google and all the other tech companies also say that they're doing their part, hopefully we'll end somewhere in the middle to grow beyond 5%.
Want to learn how to reach the ever-growing Hispanic market with amazing potential? The U.S. Hispanic market is now the largest minority group in the United States. This is creating job opportunities in companies and small businesses that cater to Hispanics. Miami Dade College has created a new course that places students among the few professionals that understand the U.S. Hispanic market. This course is designed for all majors and for current and former MDC students. Don't miss this opportunity. Register now.
So I'm going to brag a bit on the Miami tech scene here. So, I mean, I have a colleague, Matt Hagman, who some of you may know. He was at South by Southwest at a panel, I think last year, talking about Latinos in tech. And, you know, there were folks from LA and San Francisco and Texas, and you know, talking about how there was a feeling that there was a glass ceiling in some of these other communities. Whereas in Miami, you know, all the leaders of the tech community here are, you know, Manny Medina, all the big exits, Juan Diego Calle from .co, you know, have had $100 million to $1 billion exits, all from the Latino community. Miami Dade College has the largest number of Black and Hispanic graduates in the country, as well as one of the largest colleges in the country. So you know, I mean, as you look at Miami and kind of the potential for us to play a role in the kind of the national dialogue around diversity in tech, I mean, what do you think the opportunities are here?
Yeah, I think there's a few different routes. I think number one is in education, looking at, you know, we work with FIU, we work with University of Miami, a few number of schools, to look at the curriculum, to make sure that there's no secret sauce about what engineers at Google, or non-engineers, but looking at tech and coding specifically, what do they need to know in order to get in? Oftentimes a lot of people, if not universities, don't know what that looks like. A lot of the Hispanic serving institutions and African American focused ones, the curriculum isn't up to par with what an engineer needs to know to be successful at a company. So that gap, I'm trying to solve for that and make sure that we are informing everyone else about what is needed, so that it's not this like black box, you submit your resume, you don't know why you didn't get it, so that you know you need to know XYZ, and a school can help further that awareness for students. So I think that's on one side of, one, looking at curriculum. Two, recruiting. We have a lean recruiting team that tries to go to as many schools as possible. I now know that there are open arms here, so we're going to try to see if we can bring some more Googlers here. But every school, right? It's like every school in America wants Googlers, so we need to start bridging those relationships. My friend Maria invited me. She's part of the powerhouse of effort that you guys have here. We went to school together, and she came back to Miami. She went to Harvard with me. She came back. She reached out on a personal level. I came, so I think it is. Sometimes it takes one-to-one. We aim for scale, but sometimes the one-to-one helps. That's on the education side and kind of bringing resources from corporate America to the area. I think in terms of entrepreneurship, you guys have a lot going on here. It's amazing. I mean, we're trying to participate, but you guys don't need Google. We're trying to play with it, but you guys are doing amazing things. I mentioned earlier we participated with Emerge Americas. I was more involved earlier this year, but other teams since the year past. So we're keeping an eye on it. Miami's putting itself on the map in a big way, and we want to hopefully help be a part of that in the way that South by has a presence in Austin. That's notable. People know that's the convening place. I think advantage with Miami is that you not only have tech entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs at large in Miami, but a lot of Latin America comes here, and I know even Emerge is looking at Europe as well, just kind of bringing everyone together, and that's really exciting. So I think, like I said, it's kind of two buckets. One being, if it's a corporate angle, then I think it comes down to education. Educating people about what needs to be done. And if any of you are writing things down, things I want you to know, we have curriculum called CS First. That's free computer science curriculum for junior high school level students. And we launched that to bring into any community. The curriculum, we know kids need to get started on coding. We also have Made with Code. That's to get girls coding. I have my nieces doing that. They think it's a game. Make them code. They're loving it. We have partners, literally, I'm like, I have a game for you. And my cousin was like, get them off the computer, no more games. I said, no, we need them to code, it's fine. They're learning how to make video games and all kinds of things on it. Code.org is another great partner of ours, great curriculum for even younger students, younger than junior high. Code Academy, I mean, the resources are there. I think it's all of us doing our part to share this with people. If you tell a friend you came tonight, tell somebody you learned something tonight. I hope that you can tell someone about these things, because if they're free and available, there's no reason we're not hearing about it. So like I said, all that on the education front, getting people learning how to code. And then on the tech entrepreneurship side, I mean, I think this is the beginning of a dialogue, which is very interesting, about what Miami's doing. The Knight Foundation has a long track record of amazing work.
We're
and,
awesome.
Yeah. They're awesome. But, I think we always try to find the Google way of having an impact that when I have a partner, I don't like to just write a check and support in the way that any other company could. I say, if you have Google at the table, how would you do things differently? With the power of Google at the table, what is unique that we could do together? And so I think that's a challenge. People always come to Google and say, you guys aren't doing enough and you aren't doing this. It's like, well, let's make this a conversation. Because if Google came in and prescribed what everyone should do, I think that would be a very kind of unfortunate way to go about it, because you all know the community better than we do. And we want to solve together.
Can I ask you like a really dumb question? So I have a perspective on why it's a problem for Google and for tech companies generally not to have a sort of a diverse workforce. And 95% of my workforce is white or Asian, right? Then there's a huge percentage of problems that that communities have that you're just not aware of, right? And so just from a strictly like, I don't want, not necessarily I want to save the world or change the world, but I want my business to work for, the most amount of people that it can. It makes sense to try to diversify, the people who work for me, so I can get, the best input on sort of what the issues are. Is that kind of like, I mean, do you think that's fundamentally like what's driving this, or
people so get it. Like, it's odd to be. People are very aware that in order to solve core problems, like you said, or build products for the user, we always say put the user first, and that requires perspective. So people are very aware that it just makes sense. Diversity makes sense from a product standpoint, from a business standpoint, absolutely. That's a lot of great, that's good buy-in, but that doesn't solve for how to change the systematic issues and what are the barriers to access? Like, why aren't more kids getting hired? And I see some talent come through that I wish someone at their college center had given them advice on how to write their resume or how to take an interview, or those types of things where it's like, it's kind of everyone's problem that we need to solve.
Yeah,
Because people understand that 5% diversity when if Latinos are 3% and yet we're 17% of the country, that's just simple math.
Right.
And they know how to do math, so they can figure out there's a disconnect there.
Right.
But I think that maybe to your point about like having people like Manny Medina and others here locally, you guys have some amazing role models here. And I hope Miami as a community can feel that and appreciate that, because Silicon Valley doesn't have role models like that yet, and we need to make them. Like, I've literally met kids who started coding through our programs and are now engineers at Google. Like, that was the kid that's gonna be the next person to look different at this company.
So my understanding of your job is basically there's a bunch of products at Google. Those products intersect with diverse communities in different ways, right? And those products, it sounds like, have mostly, you've thought of your user as kind of the same, right? As everyone.
Rather than
right.
say the same,
Right.
say
So the user has been everyone, and there's been some change in the idea of, okay, well, what if we segmented, users and said, okay, and targeted users, what would there be an outcome there, right? And so that's kind of, I am a nerd about this stuff, so I am super fascinated about how you actually do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, so how do you segment like Google Search or YouTube, right, which are these big products which everybody already uses, right, or I think everybody uses, right, for like a particular, population. Yeah.
Well, I'll answer that in two ways. One is, I actually was really fortunate to work with our first the first marketer I ever hired at Google was a creative director. And his job was to go around the world to bring Google to other countries and see what Googliness, that it factor, that voice, that look and feel is in other markets. So he went to Russia, to China, all over the world. And when I started my work, I connected with him because I told him, I essentially want to do that in the US, right? Like, we've gone all over the world, all these other countries, and Google in other places has to adapt locally. So how can we do that in the US among an audience that sometimes doesn't speak English, maybe they speak Spanish, or they just have a different culture and affinity. And most people in this room speak English, and many are of different backgrounds. So that, rather than translating, it's transcreating in some ways. So on that note, I think that the best way we're able to do it is looking at content, because, we're a platform company. We build platforms that allow other people to build on them. So we built YouTube, and you can put whatever kind of dancing cat video you want, or motivational video, or business video. You can put whatever you want on it. Or search, we index everyone else's websites. So in most cases, we don't actually have a product that's standalone. It relies on the whole billions of users to inform it. Google Maps is just, the world, but it's all of your buildings, and it's all of your business addresses, things like that. So when it comes to thinking about how to approach this audience differently, or these audiences that are multicultural, the core of it is being culturally relevant. Looking at what are people doing on our platform. So for example, we have a number of Latino YouTube creators who are amazing. We have like Yuya in Mexico, who has a huge following in the US. She has over 9 million subscribers.
Right.
That's massive. How is she doing brand associations to inform her users about different things online? Or we're looking at, I mentioned we had Gabo, Get America's Business Online, an initiative to give small businesses free website. If you want to jot that down, gabo.com, you can get listed on Google Businesses for free, and the website and all that. So in that sense, we made sure we transcreated the website, had events locally, so we kind of look at each priority product. There need to be 5,000 of me to do every single product every day.
Right.
And the idea is that we're shaping perspective on those teams rather than trying to do everyone's job. But it is a matter of looking at what are the priority products for the company, the ones that are, either most relevant to the user or priority for the company itself. And then looking at like Google Play. How many of you ever used Google Play? Awesome. So Latinos actually over-index in using Google Play and over-index in buying Androids. So we don't target the user by race, right? Google does not take your personal information, but we see that people are loving the new Romeo Santos album and the Prince Royce album. So I'll work with Sony Latin to make sure that we're thinking about how do they make sure that their talents, fans, know that the music that they love is actually on Google Play.
Right.
So rather than trying to email blast every Latino user we have, which we would never do, we instead look at what do they like on the platforms.
Got it. Cool. Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions. He raises, there's a microphone here, and there's one over there too. So if you guys...
my name is Cesar James. I'm a marketing professor here, and I have a question. I want to hear your thoughts about the differences between like East Coast and West Coast when it comes to Latino diversity. Because, just say like the chingona, I never heard that being Latino myself. Is that a male part of that, like chingon? I don't know.
Chingon.
Yeah.
You might be a chingon.
Oh,
Someone else
okay.
would have to vouch for that. I'm kidding.
So, what is it? How Google effectively work with such a diversity? Because even within Latino, there's a lot of difference within the Latino community. So, I want to hear your thoughts about it from a marketing perspective.
Definitely very different. I came from, on a personal level, growing up in a Mexican-American dominant community. I went to school outside of Boston, very like Dominican Colombian, spent a lot of time here around the Cubano community. So I think that variety is awesome. I think that's what makes our community so special. And in terms of Google's role, I mean, we just try to keep perspective, and we try to listen very closely, both to the community when we're at events, make sure we're reflecting diversity in terms of like Latino, Afro-Latino, every kind of Latino, but also we leverage our Googlers a lot. We have Googlers from all different backgrounds. And so when I'm going to launch something, or for example, I mentioned Romeo Santos, a very popular Dominican artist, but then I make sure we also do something for Gerardo Ortiz, the regional banda Mexican music. So we have to solve for everyone. So it's funny because sometimes people think that Latinos are just like one size fits all, cookie cutters, and that could not be more false. And you, being a marketing professor, you know that firsthand. So I think that's what's most important, is when we say put the user first, it's actually listening to the nuance. And we don't try to guess it. We look at what's trending on our platforms, the type of music, the search queries. Back when I worked more closely with optimizing our ads and looking at search traffic, we saw that the word for scarf was trending in so many different varieties of Spanish terms. I grew up calling it a bufanda, but everyone has a different word for it. And sometimes we'd even argue, like, what's the best word to use? And so there's no best word. You have to include all of them. And so when our advertisers ask us, what terms do I use to advertise my product, we have to think about very holistically what words, what visuals are relevant to the broad base. Sure.
Maybe, just alternate. So please.
So my question kind of is, after high school, I spent my time traveling and was more of an autodidact. And when I learned coding, it was to Team Treehouse, and when I, WordPress kind of thing, and that's what I did. But that came from like years of just reading about, Daniel Pink and this and that. So those connections were kind of already in my brain. So when you speak about educating Latinos and things like that, especially with the culture that's more focused on getting money now, and that's not just in Hispanic cultures, it seems that cultures outside of the United States in particular are worried about just forming that like foundation of, I just want my kid to make money so I don't have to worry so much. So breaking through that and, being innovative is risky.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So
changing
with
the status
me,
quo.
right. And for me, what is my question? I'm sorry, I'm trying to give you so much context.
No worries.
When I go someplace, I want to establish just some kind of like that hub rather than a specific program, like a coding program, that happens within that hub. But do you see it as being more effective? And I think this is what I see through the Sullivan Foundation and through Google that they do, that instead of touching ground someplace, they start initiatives where they're like, if you want to do this, I think that's more effective to develop like a curriculum and market it remotely to a specific location that you want to affect, and then kind of concentrate on it more when it has more like
Right. I think it's a mix of both, because in some ways we know that there are people who, like you, have taught themselves, who may not be near a community or an accelerator program or a tech hub of some kind. So we definitely try to make sure everything's available online. And then we also look for partners who have traction on the ground, who have space that bring people together, because everyone learns differently. Some people can learn by themselves, reading a manual or however they want to learn, and others really need that guided help. And like I said, we do aim to scale, so we can't, if we were to put every single Google engineer out into the community to teach kids to code, we wouldn't have enough engineers, despite how big Google is. So it's a mix of the two, and finding partners. Even like the Idea Center, I've learned a lot today about CS50X. Which sounds amazing, and so it's like, how can we make sure that we're doing both, which is making, again, Google's, that you were mentioning earlier, the mission is to make the world's information universally accessible and useful, organizing it, and so those two parts are part of it. One is making any kind of resource like Made with Code, CS First, all those accessible online, and then our partners are a big part of what we do. They're the people on the ground who are really having that connection in person. Sure. Thanks for asking. and all the context.
I'm a Cuban American, first generation. I was born here, but both of my parents are from Cuba. I actually studied in a French program, and I specialized in sociology and economics.
Oh, cool.
So having the different perspectives has helped me analyze a lot of things. And one of the positions that I was looking at for an internship is political analysis and marketing. And I was wondering how much of that, how did sociology help you in your position and the ones that you've created and the one that you were originally there for?
Yeah.
And how much of it is actually analyzing and reporting back, and how much of it is creating new concepts and ideas to back up your analysis?
Yeah.
Sorry, that was really long.
No, I get the question because I remember when I asked myself that years ago, when my dad was like, what are you going to study, sociology? And he's like, how's that, what are you going to do with it? He didn't understand. And I told him I didn't know I was going to go into marketing. I got into people operations initially. But I've always tried to follow up on that question of what are you going to do with this and how does it tie back? And it has played a big role in the work that I do because I looked at sociology of economics, meaning how do people behave in ways that impact the economy, but I specifically looked at multicultural users or just diverse audiences. Without knowing I'd end up doing this. This wasn't the end goal. I didn't realize I'd be in a role like this, but it has been very useful in thinking about how to think about the user as an individual, but also looking at how does culture influence the way a group behaves. So I'll give you an example. When I first started doing a project with, we have a sales team looking at helping advertisers place ads online that engage Latinos. And they kept asking me, why do we have so many ads for diapers? Why are all these brands trying to put diapers up to reach Latinos? And I had to explain to them, well, a lot of Latinos, there's a lot of, there's Catholic origins in the culture, which means a lot of babies, which means a lot of Pampers. So I had to kind of connect the dots for them that way, and a lot of that is in storytelling, which evolves into a skill for marketing, right? So kind of helping people understand the connection between how people behave into what does that mean for us as marketers, as advertisers, it's really, really helpful. And then more recently, we've started doing a lot more research, and so I had to sit with data sets in college, and it was not always my favorite, but what I loved was finding a way to pull those nuggets out of the data to develop a story out of it and use that, because I think one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is Google's very data driven, 100%. And data is what gets you the meeting, and that's what gets people to buy into it, but the story is what really moves people. And so if you can use your sociology background and looking at data as a way to inform how to convey a message that really resonates with someone, that is really, really helpful. And I found that that's really been a unique skill set to have at the table, because we just talk about numbers all day and slides and everything, but until you have that connection with someone that helps them understand it, it really helps. In terms of political, that role into politics, that actually does require background working and policy work, but sociology I think is a background that applies in so many different ways.
Hi, Señorita Murillo. Thank you for being here. My name is Diego. I'm currently a student at a coding bootcamp in Fort Lauderdale, and they're also in Miami.
What's the bootcamp?
WinCode Academy.
WinCode.
Yeah, I grew up in Tijuana, and so Échale Ganas was my dad every single morning right before class.
Wow, yeah.
But you mentioned something about the spark, and that I've been thinking for many years what the spark really is, and I've thought that the spark is just innate intelligence. It's the first time that I hear that the spark is the aspiration to do something greater than yourself. But I also know that imposter syndrome now for me, and when I was in university, was can be pretty crippling for that spark. So how did you overcome crippling imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I'll tell you what it was, but I learned it way later, and then I realized that's what had happened along the way. So, great question, by the way, and Tijuana is awesome. I used to grow up going there all the time. So, one of the things that I learned in my first role at Google, I mentioned I created a bunch of roles, but that was within, let's see, I moved very quickly from roles because I was able to prove this new opportunity. But in every time, that meant I was almost starting from scratch. And in every role, I had to quickly prove value. And so I realized when I started off on the people ops side, there's a phrase that Google uses to assess talent called critical talent. It's like, are you critical talent, yes or no? And at the time I asked my manager, what does that even mean? It seems kind of subjective. And she said, well, basically we look at every Googler and say, or when it's up, it's actually specific to promotion cycle. When people are going to be promoted, are they critical talent or not? Meaning, do they have some expertise, a skill set, a network, relationships of some kind, something that makes them difficult to replace. in that context, if someone isn't promoted and they maybe choose to leave, would we be at a loss? And so that I really internalized that and realized that in all of my roles, I had to become critical talent very, very fast, because I didn't want to feel like an imposter, because I wanted to show very quickly that I would be hard to replace. And so I always found some unique thing that I could add value with, so that people knew that in order to do X, Y, Z, they had to come to me, because I was the one who did it on the team. Initially in my role, I started helping my team design websites. I'm not a designer. I designed them on Microsoft Word and took screenshots. I was the only one who had somewhat of a design ability compared to the rest of my team. So I feel like I've been doing this kind of thing for a while, because I just always see that what I find my spark is in creating opportunities for others. And that really drives me. My mom's a teacher, my dad's an optometrist, both of them first generation to go to school, and so they've been in service-oriented roles their whole lives, and that was instilled in me. So I think that spark for me has been, how can I help someone else accomplish their goals, and how can we together do that to reach a mutual goal that we believe in? And I think that spark isn't just intellect, because you can work very hard and have no sense of purpose, and that can be very sad. I think that's, if anything, a driver to find it. But I think the spark is like what makes you get out of bed every day, what really gets you excited. And if you try to align that with what you want to do professionally, I think that's where you really find a sweet spot. And I'll mention another recommendation. One of my best friends, former life coach, her name is Gina Rodan, she wrote a book called Practical Genius. And she went through imposter syndrome herself as kind of a backstory to her, but the book is about how to align your soft skills, hard skills, passions, values, and strengths, and find that intersection where you can operate from a place of genius, which could be operating from a spark within you. So Practical Genius by Gina Rodan, it's a best-selling book, really phenomenal book. If you've never had a life coach, I think this could substitute for that to help you kind of narrow in on what you want, but hopefully that answers your question about I think, like I said, maybe the short answer is the best antidote to imposter syndrome is becoming critical talent.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eliana and Ben. The purpose of our speaker series is to inspire our students. So I hope some of you go and work in Google in the future. Now you have a contact. So this is a special gift for you.
Thank you all for coming. I hope you can still hear me. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I'm on social media. If you want to find me, you can Google me and you'll see my things on a blog and others. But yes, if you have any thoughts on what I shared, please send me a tweet or something. I'd love to hear from you guys.